The dust cloud on the horizon grew larger with each passing minute, and Garrett Zimmerman squinted against the late afternoon sun of September 1882, watching what appeared to be a stagecoach careening wildly across the Kansas prairie toward his ranch outside Ellsworth. Something was clearly wrong. The coach lurched and swayed dangerously, and as it drew closer, Garrett could see the horses were running wild, their reins flapping uselessly. He dropped the fence post he had been setting and sprinted toward the barn, grabbing his saddle from the rail and throwing it onto his mare Lightning in one practiced motion. By the time he urged her into a gallop, the runaway coach had veered off the main road and was heading straight for a rocky outcropping that would surely destroy it and kill anyone inside. Garrett leaned low over Lightning's neck, pushing her harder than he had in months. His heart pounded in rhythm with the horse's hooves as he angled to intercept the panic team. The September heat made sweat run down his back beneath his worn shirt, but he barely noticed. He had not spoken to another soul in nearly 3 weeks, living alone on his ranch with only his animals for company, but the isolation had not dulled his instincts. Someone needed help, and out here in the wild Kansas territory, you did not hesitate when trouble came calling. He managed to pull alongside the lead horse, reaching out to grab the trailing reins. The leather burned his palm as he hauled back, using all his strength and lightning steadiness to slow the terrified animals. It took every ounce of skill he possessed, but gradually the team responded, their wild run slowing to a canter, then a trot, and finally a trembling halt just yards from the rocks that would have spelled disaster. Garrett dismounted quickly, his hands already moving to calm the lathered horses while his eyes scanned the coach. The driver's seat was empty, which explained everything. The man must have fallen or been thrown somewhere back along the trail. Before he could call out to ask if anyone was inside, the coach door flew open and a woman tumbled out, her fine traveling dress covered in dust, her dark hair falling from its pins. She looked up at him with eyes the color of spring leaves, wide with fear and relief in equal measure. "Thank God," she gasped, pressing one hand to her chest. "I thought I was going to die." Garrett found himself momentarily speechless, which was not entirely surprising given his lack of recent conversation, but also had something to do with the fact that she was quite possibly the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. Even disheveled and frightened, there was something luminous about her features, a delicate strength in the set of her jaw. "Are you hurt?" he finally managed, offering his hand to help her stand. She took it, and he felt the tremor running through her fingers. "I do not think so, just shaken." The driver, Mr. Henderson, he clutched his chest and fell off about 2 miles back. "I tried to reach the reins, but I could not get to them from inside." Her voice caught. "Is he dead?" "I will ride back and check on him," Garrett said, "but first let me help you somewhere safe." "My ranch is just over that rise. Can you ride?" She looked at Lightning, then back at him, squaring her shoulders in a way that made him think she was tougher than her fine clothes suggested. "I can manage if you can." He helped her mount, then swung up behind her, acutely aware of how close they were as he reached around to take the reins. She smelled of rose water and dust, an incongruous combination that somehow fit the strangeness of the moment. "I am Garrett Zimmerman," he said as he turned Lightning toward home, leading the now calm coach horses behind them. "Clara Sutton," she replied. "I was traveling to meet my intended in Ellsworth. We were to be married tomorrow." Her voice held an odd flatness when she said it, as though she were reciting facts rather than speaking of her own future. Garrett felt an unexpected disappointment at her words but pushed it aside. Of course, she was spoken for. A woman like this would not be traveling alone across Kansas for any other reason. Mail-order brides and women joining their fiancés were common enough in 1882, though most traveled by train these days rather than stagecoach. They reached his ranch house, a sturdy structure he had built himself 3 years ago when he had first claimed this land. It was not much, just 4 rooms and a wide porch, but he had made it solid and weatherproof. The barn was in better shape than many of the houses in town, and his corrals were well maintained. He took pride in his work, even if he had no one to share it with. He helped Clara down and led her inside, suddenly aware of how sparse his home must seem to someone who wore dresses with that much lace. The main room held a table he had made, 4 mismatched chairs, a wood stove, and little else beyond the necessities. No curtains on the windows, no rugs on the floor, nothing soft or decorative to ease the harsh functionality of it all. "Sit," he said, pulling out a chair. "I will get you some water, then I need to ride back for your driver." Clara sank into the chair, and he saw her hands were shaking as she smoothed her skirt. "Thank you, Mr. Zimmerman. I know you do not know me, but I am grateful, truly." He brought her water from the pump, then freshened the basin so she could wash the dust from her face and hands. "I will be back as soon as I can. Lock the door behind me if it makes you feel safer." "Will you be in danger?" she asked, looking up at him with those remarkable green eyes. The question surprised him. She was worried about him, a stranger who had pulled her from disaster. "No," he assured her. "But I need to see to Mr. Henderson and retrieve your belongings from the coach." He rode out quickly, following the obvious trail left by the runaway stagecoach. He found the driver about where Clara had indicated, lying in the prairie grass. The man was indeed dead, his face frozen in an expression of pain and surprise. Heart attack, most likely. Garrett said a quiet prayer over him, then loaded the body onto Lightning with difficulty. He would need to bring Henderson into town for proper burial, but first he needed to secure the coach and get Clara's trunk. By the time he returned to the ranch, the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and gold across the endless Kansas sky. Clara had apparently not locked the door because she opened it as soon as she heard him approach. "Is he alive?" she asked, hope in her voice. Garrett shook his head. "I am sorry. His heart gave out. I will take him to town tomorrow and notify the authorities." "You can come with me and meet your intended then." Something flickered across her face, but she nodded. "Of course. I should let him know what happened. He will be worried when the stage does not arrive." Again, that strange lack of emotion when she spoke of the man she was supposed to marry. Garrett tended to the horses and stored the coach in his barn, then brought Clara's trunk inside. It was heavy, packed with what he assumed was everything she owned. "You can sleep in my room tonight," he said. "I will take the spare room." "I cannot put you out of your own bed," Clara protested. "It is not up for discussion," he said firmly. "You have had a terrible shock. You need rest." She looked like she might argue further, but instead she simply said, "Thank you. You are very kind." He was not sure about kind, but he knew what was right. He showed her to his room, which was as sparse as the rest of the house, but at least had a proper bed with a quilt his mother had made before she died. Then he retreated to the kitchen to prepare something for their supper. Clara emerged a short while later, having changed from her traveling dress into a simpler blue calico that somehow made her eyes even more striking. She had fixed her hair into a neat braid that hung over one shoulder. "Let me help," she said when she saw him slicing bread and pulling out cold chicken left from his own dinner the night before. "You are a guest," he said. "A guest who is imposing on your hospitality," she countered. "Please, I would rather be useful than sit idle with my own thoughts." He understood that sentiment well enough, so he nodded. They worked together in comfortable silence, and he found himself studying her from the corner of his eye. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency as she set the table and arranged the simple food. She did not complain about the meager fare or the rough accommodations. In fact, she seemed almost relieved to be doing something ordinary. They sat down to eat, and for a few minutes neither spoke. Finally, Clara broke the silence. "How long have you lived here, Mr. Zimmerman?" "3 years." "And please call me Garrett. Mr. Zimmerman was my father." He paused. "He died 5 years ago. My mother followed a year later. They had a farm in Missouri, but after they passed, I wanted something of my own. So I came west and claimed this land." "No siblings?" she asked. "A brother?" "He died at Antietam." The old grief was distant now. 15 years softened into a dull ache rather than the sharp pain it had once been. "What about you? What brings you all the way to Kansas?" Clara's fingers tightened around her fork. "I answered an advertisement. Mr. Gerald Thornton of Ellsworth, Kansas, seeking a wife. He is a banker, established and respectable. We have been corresponding for 6 months." "But you have never met him," Garrett said, understanding now. "No, his letters were very proper. He sent a photograph. He seemed like a good man who could provide a stable life." She set down her fork. "I was a school teacher in Ohio. My father died last year and left debts. The school board felt it was inappropriate for me to continue teaching given the scandal of his financial troubles. I needed a fresh start, and marriage seemed the most practical solution." There was so much pain hidden beneath her matter-of-fact words. Garrett found himself angry on her behalf at people who would judge her for her father's mistakes, at a situation that had forced her to travel halfway across the country to marry a stranger. "Teaching is good work," he said. "Important work." She looked at him with surprise. "Most men think it is frivolous for women to work at all." "Most men are fools," he said bluntly, and was rewarded with her first real smile. It transformed her face, chasing away the worry and fear and exhaustion to reveal someone bright and alive underneath. They talked more easily after that. He told her about the ranch, about his plans to expand his herd and maybe plant some wheat in the lower 40 acres. She told him about the students she had taught, about her love of books and learning. He could not remember the last time he had enjoyed a conversation so much, the last time words had flowed so easily. Living alone had made him comfortable with silence, but this was better. Finally, as full darkness fell outside and the lamp burned low, Clara stifled a yawn. "I apologize. It has been a very long day." "Get some rest," Garrett said. "We will head into town after breakfast. It is about a 2-hour ride." She stood, then hesitated. "Garrett, I truly cannot thank you enough. You saved my life today. If you had not been there, if you had not acted so quickly, I would have died when that coach hit those rocks." "Any decent person would have done the same," he said. "Perhaps," she said softly, "but you were the one who did it. I will not forget that." After she retired, Garrett sat at the table for a long time, watching the lamp flicker. He should be tired. It had been a long day of hard work followed by the rescue and everything that came after. But he felt restless, filled with an energy he could not quite name. Tomorrow he would take Clara to Ellsworth and deliver her to Gerald Thornton, and that would be the end of it. She would marry her banker and live in town, and he would come back to his lonely ranch. Life would go on as it had before, except he knew, somehow, that it would not. In just a few hours, Clara Sutton had changed something fundamental. She had reminded him what it felt like to share space with another person, to talk and laugh and simply exist in comfortable companionship. She had reminded him how lonely he had been, even though he had convinced himself he was content with his solitude. He finally went to bed in the spare room, but sleep came slowly. The next morning, Garrett woke before dawn as he always did and went out to tend the animals. When he came back inside, he found Clara already dressed and working at his stove. The smell of coffee and frying bacon filled the small house. "You did not need to do that," he said. She turned from the stove with a smile. "I wanted to. Consider it small payment for your hospitality." She gestured to the table. "Sit. Everything is ready." They ate together as the sun rose, painting the prairie in shades of pink and gold. Garrett found himself trying to memorize the moment, the way the light caught in Clara's hair, the domestic comfort of sharing breakfast with someone. Tomorrow this table would be empty again except for him. After they finished, Clara insisted on washing the dishes while Garrett hitched up his wagon. He had wrapped Mr. Henderson's body in canvas and placed it carefully in the bed, covering it with a tarp. Then he helped Clara up to the seat and they set off for Ellsworth. The town was not much to look at. Just one main street lined with businesses, a church at one end and a saloon at the other. But it was growing, benefiting from its position on the Kansas Pacific Railway. Cattle drives came through regularly, and the railroad brought settlers heading further west. Gerald Thornton's bank sat prominently on the main street, a two-story building that announced prosperity and permanence. Garrett drove first to the undertaker to deliver Mr. Henderson's body and report the death to the sheriff. Clara waited in the wagon, her hands folded in her lap, her expression unreadable. Once the official business was concluded, Garrett drove to the bank. "Would you like me to come in with you?" he asked. Clara took a deep breath. "Yes, please, if you do not mind." They entered the bank together. It was cool inside, the thick walls keeping out the September heat. A young clerk looked up from behind a desk, then stood quickly when he saw Clara. "May I help you?" "I am here to see Mr. Gerald Thornton," Clara said. "I am Miss Clara Sutton." The clerk's eyes widened. "Oh, Mr. Thornton's intended. He has been quite concerned. The stage was expected yesterday." He hurried to a door at the back and knocked, then spoke quietly to someone inside. A moment later, a man emerged. Gerald Thornton was perhaps 40, with thinning hair carefully combed to disguise the bald spot, a substantial belly and shrewd eyes that immediately assessed Clara from head to toe. His gaze then shifted to Garrett, and something sharp and possessive entered his expression. "Miss Sutton," he said, his voice oily smooth. "I was worried when you did not arrive yesterday. And who is this?" "This is Garrett Zimmerman," Clara said. "He saved my life." The driver had a heart attack and the horses ran wild. Mr. Zimmerman stopped the coach before it crashed. "He gave me shelter last night and brought me to town this morning." Thornton's mouth thinned. "I see. How fortunate." He did not sound like he thought it was fortunate at all. "Well, thank you, Mr. Zimmerman, for your assistance. I will of course compensate you for your trouble." "That is not necessary," Garrett said coldly. He did not like this man, did not like the way he looked at Clara like she was property he had purchased, did not like the dismissive tone. "I insist," Thornton said. He pulled out a wallet and extracted a few bills, holding them out. "For your time and expenses." Garrett did not move to take the money. "I said it is not necessary. I did what anyone would do." An awkward silence fell. Clara was looking between the two men, her expression troubled. Finally she said, "Gerald, perhaps we could speak privately. I would like to discuss the arrangements." "Of course," Thornton said, his smile returning though it did not reach his eyes. "I have rooms prepared for you at the hotel until the wedding." "Which I assume will still be tomorrow as planned." "I suppose so," Clara said. "Though given Mr. Henderson's death and everything that happened, perhaps we might wait a few days." Thornton's face hardened. "I do not see why that should be necessary. The man was nothing to you and I have made all the arrangements. The Reverend is expecting us tomorrow afternoon." Clara seemed to fold in on herself slightly. "Of course, you are right. Tomorrow will be fine." Everything in Garrett rebelled against this. Against the idea of Clara marrying this pompous, controlling man who clearly saw her as an acquisition rather than a person. But what right did he have to interfere? She had come here to marry Gerald Thornton. That was her choice, her decision. He was just the rancher who had pulled her from a runaway coach. "Clara," he said quietly, and she turned to look at him. "If you need anything, my ranch is not far. You remember how to find it." Something flickered in her eyes, gratitude maybe, or regret. "Thank you, Garrett, for everything." He nodded to her, ignored Thornton completely, and walked out of the bank. The September sun felt too bright, the street too crowded even though barely a dozen people were visible. He climbed into his wagon and sat there for a moment, gripping the reins so hard his knuckles turned white. This was not his business. Clara was not his concern. He had known her for less than 24 hours. The smart thing, the reasonable thing, was to drive back to his ranch and forget about her. She would marry Thornton, and that would be the end of it. But as he drove out of town, he could not shake the image of her face when Thornton had dismissed her request to delay the wedding. Could not forget the way she had seemed to diminish in the banker's presence. She had been so alive at his ranch, so vibrant when they talked over dinner. And in Thornton's bank, she had become something smaller, constrained. He was halfway home when he saw a rider approaching from the direction of town. As the figure drew closer, he realized with shock that it was Clara. She was riding the horse he had loaned the livery in town, and she was alone. Garrett pulled his wagon to a stop and waited. Clara rode up, her hair escaping its pins, her face flushed from the hard ride. "Garrett," she said breathlessly, "I need to talk to you." "What happened? Did Thornton hurt you?" Anger flared hot and immediate. "No, nothing like that," she said quickly. "But I cannot marry him. I thought I could. I thought it would be fine, but I cannot do it." Her voice trembled. "He was showing me the rooms at the hotel, telling me how things would be after we married. I would not work, of course. I would not go anywhere without his permission. I would dress appropriately and behave appropriately and be a credit to his standing in the community. He had it all planned out, and none of it included asking what I wanted or who I am or anything that matters." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "I told him I needed time to think, and he said there was nothing to think about. We had an agreement. Then he tried to kiss me, and I pushed him away, and he got angry. He said I was being hysterical and ungrateful. So I told him I was leaving, and he said I could not because I had nowhere to go and no money and I would be ruined." Tears spilled down her cheeks now, and he is right. I spent everything I had to get here. I have $7 to my name and no way to get back to Ohio even if I wanted to, which I do not because there is nothing for me there anyway. I am completely without prospects or options. She looked at Garrett, and in her eyes he saw desperation and determination in equal measure. "But I remembered what you said, that if I needed anything I could come to you. So I am here and I am asking for help. Let me stay at your ranch. I will earn my keep somehow. I can cook and clean. I can help with whatever work you need done. I am not afraid of hard work. Please, Garrett." "I have nowhere else to go." Garrett felt like he had been hit in the chest. She was asking to stay with him, to live on his ranch. Part of him wanted to shout yes immediately, but the practical part of his mind was already seeing the problems. "Clara, do you understand what you are suggesting? An unmarried woman living with an unmarried man. The scandal would be enormous. You would be ruined beyond anything you faced in Ohio." "I know," she said, "but I would rather be ruined and free than respectable and trapped. At least with you I could be myself. At least I could breathe." Her voice dropped to a whisper. Please. He should say no. It was the sensible thing, the right thing, but when had he ever been particularly sensible? And looking at her now, at the hope and fear warring in her expression, he found he could not turn her away. "All right," he said. You can stay. But Clara, this is not charity. If you are going to live on my ranch, you will work. There is plenty to do, and I will not have you feeling like you are a burden. Relief washed over her face. Thank you so much. I promise I will not be a burden. I will earn my keep somehow. I swear it. Can you ride? Or should you come up on the wagon? I can ride, she said. They made their way back to his ranch together, Clara on the borrowed horse and Garrett in the wagon. His mind was racing, trying to process what he had just agreed to. He had gone from living alone to having a beautiful woman as a permanent house guest in the span of a single day. The situation was impossible, scandalous, and completely insane, but it also felt more right than anything had in years. When they reached the ranch, Garrett helped Clara down from the horse. Your trunk is still inside from last night. I suppose that works out. I need to return this horse to the livery, Clara said. I just borrowed it without really asking. I will have to go back to town. Tomorrow, Garrett said. It is getting late, and I do not want you going back there today. Thornton might try to cause trouble. We will both go tomorrow and sort everything out properly. They went inside, and Clara looked around as though seeing it for the first time. This is really my home now, she said wonderingly. For as long as you need it, Garrett confirmed. She turned to him. What do I do first? What work needs doing? He considered. The sun was already sinking toward the horizon. Tonight nothing. You have had enough upheaval for one day. Tomorrow we can figure out a routine. But I warn you, ranch life is hard. The work is constant and it is not delicate. Good, she said firmly. I am tired of being delicate. They prepared dinner together again, falling into the same comfortable rhythm they had found the night before. But now there was a different quality to it, an awareness that this was not temporary. This was their life now, however unconventional and scandalous. After they ate, Clara insisted on cleaning up while Garrett went out to check on the animals one last time before full dark. When he came back in, he found her standing at the window, looking out at the vast expanse of prairie. It is beautiful here, she said. Lonely maybe, but beautiful. You can see forever. Gets old after a while, Garrett said, or at least I thought it did. Funny how having someone to share it with changes things. She looked at him over her shoulder, and something passed between them. An acknowledgement, perhaps, of the strange situation they found themselves in. Two lonely people thrown together by chance, bound now by necessity but also by something harder to name. Garrett, she said hesitantly. I meant what I said. I will earn my keep. I know I am putting you in a difficult position. You are not putting me anywhere I do not want to be, he said honestly. I could have said no. Why did you not? He thought about that. Because you asked, because you needed help, and because maybe I was tired of being alone out here. Clara smiled, that brilliant expression that had so captivated him when he first saw it. Then perhaps we can be less alone together. I would like that, he said. The days fell into a pattern after that. True to her word, Clara threw herself into the work of the ranch. She proved remarkably capable once she got past her initial unfamiliarity with the tasks. She learned to milk the cow, feed the chickens, collect eggs. She took over all the cooking and cleaning, but did not stop there. She insisted on learning how to mend fences, how to groom the horses, how to repair tack. Garrett found himself constantly surprised by her. She did not complain about the heat or the dirt or the endless labor. If anything, she seemed to thrive on it. The worried, constrained woman who had stood in Thornton's bank was disappearing, replaced by someone more confident and alive. They had gone back to town that first day after she arrived, returning the horse and making it clear to anyone who asked that Clara was working as Garrett's housekeeper. It was a flimsy pretense that fooled no one, but it was enough to maintain basic propriety. Thornton had tried to confront them, insisting that Clara was breaching their agreement, but she had stood firm. There was no agreement, she had said clearly. There was a possibility which I have chosen not to pursue. I am sorry if you made arrangements, but I am not obligated to marry you. He had blustered and threatened, but in the end there was nothing he could do. Clara had not signed any contracts. She owed him nothing. They had left him standing in the street, red-faced and furious, and Garrett had felt a savage satisfaction at the banker's impotent rage. Word spread quickly, as it always did in small towns. The next time Garrett went to the general store for supplies, the owner had given him a long look but said nothing. Mrs. Patterson, the minister's wife, had sniffed disapprovingly but still sold him the fabric Clara had requested for new curtains. The scandal was there, simmering beneath the surface, but no one confronted them directly. Partly that was because Garrett kept mostly to himself and always had. He was known as a hard worker who paid his debts and caused no trouble. Partly it was because Clara's story had gotten around, the tale of the runaway coach and the heroic rescue, and people had a soft spot for drama. And partly it was because this was Kansas in 1882, and the frontier had a way of making people more flexible about conventions when the alternative was loneliness and isolation. Still, Garrett was aware that they were living on borrowed time. Eventually, the situation would become truly untenable. Clara would be completely ruined, unable to marry anyone respectable even if she wanted to. And if anyone from the church or the town council decided to make an issue of it, they could force her to leave. He tried not to think about that. Tried to focus on the present, on the pleasure of having her there. And it was a pleasure, more than he had anticipated. They worked side by side during the day, sometimes talking, sometimes in comfortable silence. In the evenings they would sit on the porch and watch the sun set, discussing everything and nothing. She told him about the books she had read, the places she dreamed of seeing. He told her about his childhood in Missouri, about his brother who died in the war, about the plans he had for the ranch. They never spoke about the future beyond the next day's work. It felt too fragile, too uncertain. One evening, about 3 weeks after Clara had arrived, they were sitting on the porch as usual when she said, "I got a letter from Gerald Thornton today." Garrett tensed. What did it say? "He wants to meet with me. He says he forgives me for my temporary madness and is willing to proceed with the marriage." Her voice was carefully neutral. "What do you want to do?" Garrett asked, though the thought of her leaving made his chest tight. "I already sent my reply. I told him no." Firmly and finally. She looked at Garrett. "I do not want that life. I thought I did, or at least I thought I could accept it. But now that I know what it feels like to be truly myself, I cannot go back." Relief flooded through him. "I am glad." "Are you?" she asked softly. "Truly." "Because I know this situation is difficult for you. People talk. They judge. And I am keeping you from finding a wife of your own, someone you could actually marry." He turned to look at her in the fading light. "Clara, do you think I want some other woman here? Do you think I rescued you just to play the hero and then count the days until you left?" "I do not know what you want," she said, and there was vulnerability in her voice that made his heart ache. What did he want? He had been avoiding that question, but now it was there between them, demanding an answer. He wanted her to stay, yes. But more than that, he wanted the right to keep her there. Not as his housekeeper or his charity case, but as his wife. He wanted to wake up next to her every morning and fall asleep beside her every night. He wanted to build a life with her, a real life, not this pretense they were maintaining. But was it too soon? They had known each other less than a month. And even though they spent every day together, even though he felt he knew her better than he had known anyone in his life, was that enough to base a marriage on? Then again, people married for less all the time. Clara herself had been prepared to marry Thornton sight unseen. At least what Garrett felt for her was real and growing stronger every day. "I want you to stay," he said carefully, "but properly. As my wife, if you would have me." Clara's eyes widened. "Garrett, are you asking me to marry you?" "I suppose I am," he said. "I know I should probably court you properly first. Take you to church socials and dances and all those things people do. But we are already past propriety anyway, and I do not want to waste time on pretense. I care about you, Clara, more than I expected to care about anyone. I want to build a life with you. Will you marry me?" She was quiet for a long moment, and his heart sank. He had misread the situation. She did not feel the same way. She was going to refuse, and then things would be awkward between them, and eventually she would leave after all. Then she said, "Yes." His head snapped up. "Yes, yes," she repeated, and now she was smiling through tears. "I care about you too. I think I started to fall in love with you that first night when we sat at this table and talked for hours. I have been trying not to hope, trying not to assume, but yes, I will marry you." Garrett stood and pulled her up with him, his hands cupping her face. "Are you certain this is not desperation or gratitude talking?" "I am certain," she said. "This is me, Clara Sutton, choosing you because you are the best man I have ever known, because you make me laugh, because you see me as a person, not a possession, because when I am with you I feel like myself." He kissed her then, and it felt like coming home. Her lips were soft and warm, and when she wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back, he thought his heart might burst from the sheer joy of it. They stayed there on the porch as the stars came out, holding each other, talking in whispers about their future now that they dared to imagine one together. They decided to marry quickly. There was no point in a long engagement when they were already living together. And Clara pointed out with practical humor that getting married would actually improve their scandalous situation, rather than make it worse. Garrett rode into town the next day and spoke to Reverend Matthews, a young minister who had arrived in Ellsworth just a few months earlier and seemed less concerned with rigid propriety than with genuine faith. "I know the circumstances are unusual," Garrett said, "and I know people will talk. But I love her and she loves me, and we want to do this right." Reverend Matthews had smiled. "Mr. Zimmerman, I have married people in this town who barely spoke the same language, who had known each other for a week, who were marrying to save a farm or settle a debt. If you are marrying for love, you are already ahead of most. Bring her by tomorrow and we will discuss the arrangements." Clara met with the Reverend the following day, and they set the date for 2 weeks hence, on October 20th. It would be a simple ceremony with no guests beyond whoever happened to be in town and wanted to attend. Clara had no family to invite, and Garrett's only living relatives were distant cousins he had not spoken to in years. "I do not need a big wedding," Clara said as they drove home from town. "I just need you." Those 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Clara sewed herself a new dress from the fabric Garrett had bought, a beautiful deep blue that matched her eyes. It was practical enough for everyday wear but fine enough for a wedding, which seemed appropriate for their situation. Garrett cleaned up the house as best he could, fixed the squeaky hinge on the bedroom door, and built a proper bookshelf for the small collection of books Clara had brought with her. They were careful to maintain propriety during those weeks. Clara continued to sleep in Garrett's room while he took the spare room. They did not repeat that kiss on the porch, though Garrett thought about it constantly. There was a tension between them now, an anticipation that made every accidental touch feel charged with meaning. The night before the wedding, Clara cooked a special dinner. She had spent the afternoon making a roast with vegetables from the small garden she had planted behind the house. They ate by lamplight, talking about their plans for the ranch, carefully avoiding the topic of what would happen the next day. Finally, as they were cleaning up, Clara said, "Are you nervous?" "Terrified," Garrett admitted. "Not about marrying you, about failing you, about not being enough." She turned to him, her expression serious. "Garrett Zimmerman, you are more than enough. You are everything I did not know I was looking for. Tomorrow, when I stand up in that church and promise to love you for the rest of my life, I will mean every word." "I will too," he said. "I love you, Clara." "I love you too." The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, the October air crisp with the promise of coming winter. Garrett dressed in his best clothes, which were not much but were clean and pressed. He rode into town early to make sure everything was ready. Reverend Matthews met him at the church with a reassuring smile. "Nervous?" the Reverend asked. "A bit," Garrett admitted. "That is natural, but Mr. Zimmerman, I spoke with Miss Sutton several times these past weeks. She is a remarkable woman and she clearly loves you deeply." "You are a fortunate man." "I know," Garrett said. "Believe me, I know." Clara arrived an hour later, driven into town by her neighbor Tom Wheeler, who had a farm about 5 miles from Garrett's ranch. She looked beautiful in her blue dress, her hair arranged in a simple but elegant style, her face glowing with happiness. A few townspeople had gathered in the church, mostly out of curiosity but also because weddings were community events in small towns. Mrs. Patterson was there, and the general store owner with his wife, and a handful of others. Garrett barely noticed them. His entire attention was fixed on Clara as she walked up the aisle toward him. She was smiling, and he found himself smiling back, all his nervousness dissolving in the face of her joy. Reverend Matthews conducted a simple but heartfelt ceremony. When it came time for the vows, Garrett spoke his with complete sincerity, promising to love and honor Clara for the rest of his days. And when Clara made her promises in return, her voice clear and steady, he felt tears prick at his eyes. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Matthews said. "Garrett, you may kiss your bride." Garrett did, and it was even better than the kiss on the porch had been because this time Clara was truly his wife, his partner, his future. The small gathering applauded, and they spent a few minutes accepting congratulations. Even Mrs. Patterson managed to smile and wish them well, though she could not help adding, "I do hope you will start attending services regularly now that you are properly married." "We will," Clara assured her, and Garrett nodded agreement. It was a small price to pay for acceptance in the community. They drove back to the ranch in Garrett's wagon, sitting close together. Clara had her head on his shoulder, and Garrett had his arm around her waist. Neither of them spoke much. There was no need for words. Everything they needed to say was communicated in the comfortable silence, in the way they fit together. When they reached home, Garrett lifted Clara down from the wagon, but instead of setting her on her feet, he carried her toward the house. She laughed, her arms around his neck. "What are you doing, carrying my bride over the threshold?" he said. "It is tradition." "I did not know you were a traditional man," she teased. "I am not," he admitted, "but this seemed important." He carried her inside and set her down gently in the main room. Their home. No longer his or hers, but theirs together. Clara looked around, and he could see her eyes taking in the small touches she had added over the past weeks, the curtains she had made, the rug she had woven, the books on the new shelf. It looked like a home now instead of just a place to sleep. "I am so happy," she said softly. "Is it strange that I am grateful for that runaway stagecoach? If it had not happened, I would be married to Gerald Thornton right now, miserable and trapped. Instead, I am here with you." "I am grateful too," Garrett said. "Although I am mostly grateful that I happened to be out checking that fence line when you came by. If I had been working on the other side of the ranch, I might have missed you entirely." Fate, Clara said. It was meant to be. I do not know about fate, Garrett said. But I know I love you and I intend to spend the rest of my life proving it. She smiled and reached up to cup his face. Then prove it. He kissed her again, deeply and thoroughly, and when he swept her into his arms and carried her to the bedroom, she went willingly. The door closed behind them, and for the first time in 3 years, Garrett's house was filled with love and warmth and the promise of a shared future. The months that followed were the happiest of Garrett's life. He and Clara fell into a comfortable rhythm, working the ranch together during the day and spending their evenings planning for the future. As winter approached, they worked to prepare the property. Garrett taught Clara how to chop wood, and she proved surprisingly good at it once she got past her initial hesitancy. She taught him how to preserve vegetables from her garden, knowledge she had learned from her mother. They attended church on Sundays, which helped smooth over the remaining scandal of their unconventional beginning. Clara's warmth and intelligence won people over, and gradually they were accepted into the community. Not everyone approved, of course. Gerald Thornton remained coldly hostile on the rare occasions their paths crossed, and a few of the more rigid townspeople maintained their disapproval. But most people came around. In December, a snowstorm hit, blanketing the prairie in white. Garrett and Clara were snowed in for 3 days, and rather than being trapped, it felt like a gift. They stayed inside by the fire, cooking together, reading aloud from Clara's books, making love, and talking about everything and nothing. Garrett thought he might remember those 3 days as some of the best of his life. When spring came, Clara announced she was pregnant. Garrett had hoped but had not dared to assume, and when she told him, he found himself overcome with emotion. He was going to be a father. They were going to have a child together. "Are you pleased?" Clara asked, watching his face. "Pleased," he managed. "Clara, I am beyond pleased. I am ecstatic. Terrified but ecstatic," she laughed. "I am terrified too, but we will figure it out together." As her belly grew over the summer months, Garrett found himself constantly amazed by the changes in her body, by the reality of the life growing inside her. He was protective to the point of being overbearing, constantly worried that she was doing too much, that the work was too hard. But Clara was not delicate. She continued working the ranch right up until the last weeks of her pregnancy, stubborn and strong. In November of 1883, Clara went into labor. Garrett rode hard to fetch the midwife, Mrs. Cooper, who lived about an hour away. The hours that followed were the longest of Garrett's life. He paced outside the bedroom door while Mrs. Cooper tended to Clara, flinching at every cry of pain. He had faced down wild animals and fought fires and survived isolation, but nothing had prepared him for the helplessness of listening to the woman he loved in agony. Finally, when he was certain he could not bear another minute, he heard a new sound. A baby's cry, strong and healthy and miraculous. Mrs. Cooper opened the door, smiling. "Congratulations, Mr. Zimmerman, you have a son, a son." Garrett's knees went weak, and "Clara, she is fine, tired but fine. Come meet your boy." Garrett entered the room on shaky legs. Clara was propped up against the pillows, looking exhausted but radiant. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket. She looked up at Garrett with tears streaming down her face. "Look what we made," she whispered. He sat on the edge of the bed and looked down at his son. The baby had a shock of dark hair and a red, wrinkled face. He was perfect. "He is beautiful," Garrett said, his voice thick. "He has your nose," Clara said with a tired laugh. "Poor kid," Garrett joked, but his eyes were wet. He touched one tiny hand and the baby's fingers curled around his automatically. The gesture was so small and so huge at the same time. This was his son, his family. They named him Grant, after Garrett's brother who had died in the war. Garrett Zimmerman, born November 15, 1883. Garrett sent word to Reverend Matthews, who came out to the ranch to bless the baby. News spread through Ellsworth, and over the following weeks, neighbors stopped by with gifts and well wishes. Even Mrs. Patterson brought a knitted blanket, though she could not resist commenting that Clara should have started attending the ladies' prayer group months ago. The first months of Grant's life were exhausting and wonderful. Garrett learned to change diapers and walk the floor with a fussy baby in the middle of the night. Clara managed to run the household and care for Grant with grace, though she admitted to Garrett in quiet moments that she was more tired than she had ever been in her life. "But it is worth it," she said one night as they watched their son sleep in the cradle Garrett had built. "He is worth everything." "You both are," Garrett said, putting his arm around her. "You are my whole world." The years passed, marked by the steady rhythm of ranch life and the growth of their family. In 1885, Clara gave birth to a daughter they named Grace. She had Clara's green eyes and a sunny disposition that made everyone who met her smile. Grant was a protective older brother, even at just a year and a half, watching over his baby sister with serious concentration. The ranch prospered too. Garrett expanded his herd and added that wheat field in the lower 40 acres. Clara took over the accounts and proved to have a head for numbers that far exceeded Garrett's basic arithmetic. Together, they built something solid and lasting. In 1887, another son arrived. They named him James, and he was a handful from the start, energetic and curious and constantly getting into trouble. Garrett often joked that James had inherited all of Clara's determination and stubbornness, to which she would reply that he had clearly gotten Garrett's recklessness and poor decision-making. But they both adored him. The children grew, and the ranch grew with them. Grant showed an aptitude for working with horses and spent hours in the barn with Garrett, learning everything his father could teach him. Grace loved helping Clara in the garden and proved to have green thumbs, making things grow even in the harsh Kansas climate. James was interested in everything and nothing, flitting from one fascination to another with boundless energy. In 1890, Garrett and Clara celebrated their 8th wedding anniversary. They were sitting on the porch as they had so many evenings, watching the sun set over the prairie. The children were inside, Grant reading to Grace and James while they were supposed to be getting ready for bed. They could hear giggles and protests drifting out through the open window. "You ever think about that day?" Clara asked. "When the coach ran away and you rode out to stop it?" "Sometimes," Garrett admitted. "I think about how different everything would be if I had been working somewhere else that day, if I had not seen you." "I think about it too," Clara said. "I think about the fact that I was on my way to marry a man I had never met, someone who would have made me miserable, and instead I found you. You promised you would earn your keep somehow," Garrett reminded her with a smile. "I think you have more than kept that promise." Clara laughed. "I did say that, did I not? I was so desperate and scared I had no idea what I was asking for." "Neither did I," Garrett said, "but I would not change a single thing. Not even James breaking that window last week," Clara teased. "Well, maybe that," Garrett conceded, "but nothing else." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, hands linked between them. Inside, they heard Grant telling James to settle down and go to sleep, mimicking Garrett's stern voice. Clara smiled. "We made a good life," she said. "Against all odds and propriety, we made something real and lasting." "We did," Garrett agreed. "And we are not done yet. We have years ahead of us still. Years of children causing chaos and animals escaping and crops failing and all the challenges that come with this life," Clara said. "Years of watching our children grow," Garrett countered. "Of building something together, of loving each other, I will take all the challenges if it means I get to spend my life with you. Clara leaned her head on his shoulder. I love you, Garrett Zimmerman. Thank you for saving me. I love you too, Clara Zimmerman, and you saved me right back. I just did not know I needed saving until you came along. As the stars came out one by one over the vast Kansas sky, they sat together in perfect contentment. Inside the house, the children's voices gradually quieted as they finally settled into sleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more work, more chaos. But tonight, everything was exactly as it should be. The years continued to unfold with a comfortable rhythm. Grant grew into a fine young man, tall and serious like his father, but with his mother's intelligence and love of learning. When he turned 18 in 1901, several young women in Ellsworth showed interest, but he was patient, wanting to be sure before he committed to marriage. Garrett and Clara exchanged knowing looks, recognizing that their son had learned from watching their relationship what love should look like. Grace developed into a beauty with her mother's features and grace. She had also inherited Clara's sharp mind and love of teaching. When she was 16, she began helping at the new school in Ellsworth, assisting the teacher with the younger children. Clara watched with pride as her daughter discovered the same joy in education that she herself had once found. James remained the wildest of the three, full of energy and ideas. He talked about traveling, about seeing the world beyond Kansas. Garrett worried sometimes that his youngest son would not be content with ranch life, but Clara reminded him that James was still young. He had time to figure out what he wanted. In 1895, tragedy struck when a drought hit the area. Crops failed across the region, and many ranchers lost everything. Garrett and Clara struggled through it, using their savings and working harder than ever to keep the ranch afloat. They sold off part of their herd and tightened their belts, but they survived when many others did not. The experience brought them even closer together, reminding them that they were strongest when they faced challenges as a team. And it taught their children valuable lessons about perseverance and resilience. When the drought finally broke in 1896 and the rains returned, it felt like a rebirth. The prairie bloomed green again, and slowly the ranch recovered. Garrett and Clara rebuilt what they had lost, and in some ways came out stronger for having survived the hardship. In 1898, Grant met a young woman named Sarah Miller, whose family had moved to Ellsworth from Illinois. She was quiet and kind, and she made Grant smile in a way he never had before. Garrett watched his son fall in love and felt a mixture of pride and nostalgia, remembering his own unexpected love story. Grant married Sarah in the spring of 1899, and they built a small house on the edge of Garrett and Clara's property. Grant continued working the ranch alongside his father, and Sarah fit seamlessly into the family. Clara adored her new daughter-in-law, and the two women became close friends. In 1900, Grant and Sarah had their first child, a daughter they named Elizabeth. Garrett held his granddaughter for the first time and felt his heart expand in ways he had not anticipated. To be a grandfather, to see his son become a father, to witness the continuation of the family he and Clara had built together, it was overwhelming in the best possible way. Clara cried happy tears as she rocked baby Elizabeth, whispering stories about her father and grandmother, about the family she was part of. "Another generation," she said to Garrett later. "Can you believe it?" "Sometimes I still cannot believe the first generation," Garrett admitted. "That you chose me, that we made all of this." "I chose you every day," Clara said. "I still choose you." Grace married in 1902 at the age of 19, wedding a young lawyer named Robert Harrison who had opened a practice in Ellsworth. The wedding was larger than Garrett and Clara's had been, held in the church with half the town in attendance. Grace was radiant in a white dress, and Robert looked at her like she hung the moon. At the reception, held in the town hall, Garrett danced with his daughter while Clara wiped away tears. "Take care of her," Garrett told Robert when he handed Grace over for their first dance as husband and wife. "I will," Robert promised. "I know how lucky I am." Grace and Robert settled in town, where Grace continued teaching and Robert built his law practice. They had 2 children in quick succession, twin boys born in 1903. Clara loved having grandchildren close enough to visit regularly. She would ride into town once a week to help Grace with the energetic twins, coming home with stories about their antics. James remained unmarried longer than his siblings, too restless to settle down. In 1904, when he was 20, he announced he wanted to travel east to see the cities and maybe attend university. Garrett had mixed feelings about it, proud of his son's ambitions but sad to see him go. "Let him fly," Clara counseled. "He will come back when he is ready, or maybe he will not, and that will be all right too. We raised him to think for himself." James left in the fall of 1904, and for a while the house felt emptier. But he wrote long letters describing his adventures, and Garrett and Clara took pride in his experiences even as they missed him. The ranch continued to thrive. Garrett was in his 50s now, and while he was still strong, he was grateful to have Grant working alongside him. Together, they managed the property and even expanded a bit, buying an adjacent parcel when it came up for sale. Clara had gray in her hair now and lines around her eyes, but to Garrett, she was as beautiful as the day he first saw her tumbling out of that stagecoach. More beautiful, actually, because now he knew her completely. He knew her strength and her humor, her kindness and her occasional stubbornness. He knew the sound of her laugh and the way she hummed while she cooked. He knew every expression that crossed her face and what each one meant. In 1905, James returned home. He had been gone for a year and had seen New York and Boston and Philadelphia. He had attended lectures at universities and visited museums and experienced a world far different from Kansas. But he had also, he admitted to his parents, realized that his home was here. "I needed to go," he told them. "I needed to see what else was out there, but this is where I belong. This land, this life, I want to be part of it." Garrett embraced his son, relief and pride overwhelming him. Clara hugged James next, laughing and crying at the same time. Their youngest had come home. James threw himself into ranch work with new appreciation, no longer taking for granted what his family had built. And in 1906, he met a young widow named Margaret who had a small farm near Ellsworth. She had lost her husband to pneumonia the year before and was struggling to keep her land. James began helping her, and friendship slowly developed into something more. They married in 1907, and Margaret sold her land to combine resources with the Zimmerman ranch. She was a practical, hard-working woman who fit perfectly into the family. She and James had 3 children over the next several years, adding even more grandchildren for Garrett and Clara to dote on. By 1910, the Zimmerman Ranch was firmly established as one of the most successful in the area. The house had been expanded twice to accommodate visiting children and grandchildren. The barn and outbuildings were in excellent repair. The land was productive and well managed. Garrett and Clara, now in their late 50s and early 40s respectively, could look around at what they had built with deep satisfaction. They still sat on the porch most evenings, watching the sunset together. Sometimes they were alone, and sometimes they were surrounded by grandchildren playing in the yard. Either way, they were content. One evening in the summer of 1910, as they sat watching the sky turn brilliant shades of orange and pink, Clara said, "Do you remember when I promised I would earn my keep somehow?" Garrett smiled. "I remember. I think I kept that promise," she said. Clara, you did more than keep it. You built a life, raised a family, made this house a home. You turned a lonely rancher into the happiest man alive. We did it together, she corrected. You gave me a chance when I had nowhere else to go. You saw me as a person when other men saw me as a commodity. You loved me for who I was, not what I could be. I still do, Garrett said. Every single day. She reached for his hand and he took it, their fingers intertwining automatically after so many years together. 28 years, she said. Since that day, the stagecoach ran wild and you rode out to save me. Best day of my life, Garrett said. Well, that and our wedding day, and the days our children were born, and the days we became grandparents. I suppose I have had a lot of best days. Clara laughed, that wonderful sound that still made his heart lift. Me too. So many best days, all because you were brave enough to stop a runaway coach and kind enough to take in a desperate woman. And because you were brave enough to walk away from a bad situation and smart enough to give us a chance, Garrett countered. They fell into comfortable silence, watching the last light fade from the sky. Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges, more moments both ordinary and extraordinary. But tonight, sitting together on the porch of the home they had built, surrounded by the life they had created, everything was perfect. The years rolled on as years do. Garrett and Clara aged together, their bodies slower but their love as strong as ever. They became great-grandparents in 1920, when Grant's daughter Elizabeth had a child of her own. Garrett held his great-grandson and marveled at the passage of time, at the legacy he and Clara had created. The ranch remained in the family, with Grant taking over more of the management as Garrett stepped back. But Garrett still went out every day, still checked on the animals and walked the fence lines, unable to imagine a life that did not include the land he had claimed and cultivated for so many years. Clara's hair was silver now, and she moved more slowly, but her mind remained sharp and her spirit undiminished. She still cooked Sunday dinners for the entire extended family, her kitchen full of children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The house rang with laughter and conversation, and she presided over it all with quiet contentment. In the summer of 1925, Garrett and Clara celebrated their 43rd wedding anniversary. Their children organized a party at the ranch, and it seemed like half of Ellsworth showed up. There were speeches and toasts, stories shared about the couple who had started with such scandal and built something so enduring. Grant spoke about his parents' example, about the love and partnership that had shaped his own marriage. Grace talked about her mother's strength and intelligence, about how Clara had shown her that women could be more than society expected. James described his father's integrity and work ethic, the values that had guided the whole family. Garrett stood with Clara's hand in his, overwhelmed by the testimony of their life together. When it was his turn to speak, he kept it simple. I was a lonely rancher who got lucky, he said. I saw a woman who needed help and I gave it. She promised she would earn her keep somehow, and she earned it 1,000 times over. She gave me a family, a home, a purpose. She gave me everything. Clara, I love you more today than I did 43 years ago, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. There was not a dry eye in the crowd as Clara stood on her toes to kiss him, applause and cheers erupting around them. They danced together that night, slowly swaying to music played by Grace's oldest son on his fiddle. Garrett held Clara close, thinking about all the dances they had shared over the years, all the moments both monumental and mundane that had woven together to create their life. Happy, he murmured in her ear. Deliriously, she replied. You. More than I ever dreamed possible, he said honestly. As the party wound down and the last guests departed, Garrett and Clara made their way to their porch, their sanctuary for over 4 decades. They sat in the same spot they always did, looking out over the ranch that had been the foundation of everything they built. "We did well, did we not?" Clara asked softly. "We did," Garrett agreed. "Against all odds, we did very well indeed." They sat together under the stars, hands linked, hearts full. Two people who had found each other in the most unexpected way possible, who had created a love story that started with a runaway stagecoach and a desperate promise, and who had built it into something beautiful and lasting. Garrett Zimmerman had been a lonely rancher when Clara Sutton tumbled into his life that September day in 1882. And she had been a desperate woman fleeing a bad situation when she promised she would earn her keep somehow. Neither of them could have imagined then where that promise would lead, what they would create together. But as they sat on their porch that night, surrounded by the evidence of their life together, both knew with absolute certainty that they had been blessed beyond measure. They had found each other, had chosen each other, and had built something that would outlast them both, a legacy of love and family that would continue for generations to come. The prairie stretched out before them, vast and eternal, the same view they had shared for so many years. But they were not the same people who had first sat here together. They had grown and changed, had faced challenges and celebrated triumphs, had raised children and welcomed grandchildren and great-grandchildren into the world. Through it all, they had remained partners, lovers, best friends. They had been everything to each other, and in being everything to each other, they had become more than either could have been alone. As the night deepened and the stars wheeled overhead, Garrett squeezed Clara's hand gently. She squeezed back, the simple gesture communicating volumes without a single word needed. After 43 years together, they often did not need words. They understood each other completely, loved each other wholly, and treasured every moment they had together. Tomorrow would come with its own joys and challenges. There would be more work to do, more grandchildren to spoil, more sunsets to watch together. But tonight, in this perfect moment, they were simply two people who had found love in the most unexpected place and had nurtured it into something extraordinary. The lonely rancher and the stranded bride had written their own love story, one that would be told and retold in their family for generations to come. And if anyone asked them the secret to their long and happy marriage, they would have the same answer. They had chosen each other, not once but every single day, and that choice had made all the difference.